The following featured presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Welcome to Warsologies, the podcast about science and other academic fields of study seen in Star Wars. My name is Melissa Miller, and I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm a science writer and freelance writer for Star Wars Insider magazine.
And I'm James Floyd. I am your other co-host, and I also write for Star Wars Insider magazine and StarWars.com. This episode of Star Warsologies, we're going to chat about reptiles and amphibians in Star Wars, as seen in all sorts of wildlife from Dagobah and all the other planets, and everyone's favorite egg layer, Frog Lady from The Mandalorian. Our guest expert today is Dr. Earyn McGee. Earyn is a herpetologist and science communicator with a PhD at the University of Arizona's School for Natural Resources and the Environment. Dr. McGee is an If-Then ambassador for the American Association of the Advancement of Science, and she is the creator of the game #FindThatLizard. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. Oh, I'm excited to be here.
Earyn, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the definition of herpetology is? We'll start there.
Sure. So pretty simple. It's someone who studies reptiles and amphibians, and I specifically study lizards. Hence, #FindThatLizard.
How did you get into this field?
So I always wanted to work with animals, and when I got to college, one of my upperclassmen mentors introduced me to this guy working with lizards who became my undergraduate mentor. With him, I got my first opportunity to do field work, and I really fell in love with it. I was just like, you guys are paying me money. You're paying him real money to go outside and walk around and catch lizards all day. Say less. Say less. So, sign me up. How can I do more?
Did you catch lizards and such when you were a kid?
A little bit, occasionally, but it wasn't one of those things where it's just yeah, I'm going out here to catch the lizard. I was trying to catch whatever I could see. If I could see it and I could grab it, it was in my hands.
That's awesome. I love that. And yeah, Find That Lizard, for those who haven't already played, is great because lizards, we'll get into it, but part of their adaptations are generally to sort of blend into the background, hide and stuff like that. So she posts pictures that look like just, the desert or something like that. And sure enough, there is a lizard in there. And I'm pretty bad at the game, I'll be honest.
It's hard when they're not moving. I have the benefit of when I'm out and about, a lot of times they do move and I'm like, oh, look, there's a lizard, and take a picture.
Yeah.
That type
of
thing.
Think 100% of the time I see a lizard, it's because it does a little scurry or something like that.
Yeah.
What's your history with Star Wars? Were you into it as a kid? Did it influence your love of science at all?
I can't really say that it was much of an influence, but I definitely did love the movies, and Hayden Christensen was one of my major crushes for a very long time, because of, his role as Anakin and stuff. And so, yeah, I grew up, my parents are super, I don't know if they would call themselves nerds, but they definitely are. And so, we definitely grew up with the movies, and every time something new came out, we went to go see it. So, yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. So how do amphibians and reptiles get lumped together into one science?
That's just how it was, essentially, because they are relatively closely related to one another, but they didn't necessarily have to be lumped together, but they were just kind of both for herpetology, that word comes from herpe or whatever, and it just means creepy crawly things. And so that's a creepy crawly thing, and that was the study of that. And then eventually we were like, okay, actually these things aren't as closely related as we thought, and they branch off, and now we're further looking into the different organisms.
Okay. So what is the difference between a reptile and an amphibian? Is there a simple definition?
So it is pretty simple. You can think about their life histories. With reptiles in general, they don't go through any kind of larval stage, and a lot of amphibians will, and amphibians have that life stage typically tied to the water, or their whole entire life is tied to the water, whereas lizards are not. And lizards have scales, whereas amphibians have smooth skin. And so with lizards, they aren't, slimy, but And then with amphibians, they also aren't slimy, but they have mucus, not slime. It's mucus, and that helps them to keep their skin moist when they're out of the water. So like different things like that help differentiate them just like by looking at them and then looking at their life histories.
How would a reptile or an amphibian be different in the galaxy far, far away when you've got lots of different planets? Like that definition can be kind of different.
It's true. It's just the Earth definitions of reptiles and amphibians.
Well, then if it doesn't fit the definition, is it really a reptile or an amphibian, or would it really just be something just totally different?
Right. Yeah. Galactic reptiles or something like that. I mean, there's lots of examples, especially because in Star Wars, we have those famous like monoclimates, right? There's a whole ice planet. There's a whole swamp planet. So, you know, something like tauntauns that are a snow lizard. Are there any sort of cold weather reptiles or amphibians on Earth?
Yeah, so there are a lot of like high elevation lizard species, and I looked at lizards specifically. I don't know about our other reptiles. And really, if it was going to be another one, it would be like snakes. But the main ones that I know of are lizards. So like for a while, the toad-headed agama was thought to be like the lizard that was living at the highest elevation at 5,300 meters on the Tibetan Plateau.
Wow.
But relatively recently, there was this species of, and I'm going to say this name wrong, Liolamus lizard that was found in the Andean mountains, and it was at 5,400 meters. And so scientists were thinking that the reason that it was able to be at such a high altitude is because of climate change. You know, as the coldness of the mountain gets pushed up and up and up, these lizards are able to be like, okay, well, it's not as cold as it used to be there. So now we can kind of start to colonize these new environments. And so that's what they think is going on, but there's still research being done to figure out exactly why those lizards are able to live at such high altitudes. But it isn't unusual to see lizards on a mountain. And as a matter of fact, my graduate research, though not as high elevation as those mountains, was on a mountain. So the lizards that I was studying do like higher elevations. So it's a thing.
And converting those elevations for those who don't think in meters, 5,400 meters is about 17,700 feet. So those are some pretty tall mountains that these lizards are living at.
Yeah, that's wild. I never thought about lizards hanging out up there. So I like the idea that I mean, I'm sure it is climate change, right? That's the more likely scenario, but I just like the idea that like the Andean ones like got word like, oh, in Tibet, they go to 5,300 meters. We gotta beat them by 100 meters, you know?
Right.
I know that's not how lizards probably work, but
you never know. There might be some kind of underground lizard communication thing that we don't know about.
So we're already on to the underground lizard people.
Well, then wait, that's Doctor Who. That's different. Okay. Yeah, so something that comes up a lot in the natural history books and sort of background in Star Wars is reptavians, sort of reptile avian. So I guess it's sort of like dinosaurs here on Earth, but is that something that's a real term? Is that something that some concept artist just kind of came up with? Or yeah, how would that translate?
It does sound like it should be something that's real, but it's not. And I did Google it to make sure. I was like, and then no, it's not a real word. And I agree that it's probably would more describe like our dinosaurs and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I feel like there's a lot of those things. So I'm thinking of Terrell Whitlatch's natural history book, and she's going to be a guest on Star Warsologies pretty soon, so we can ask her more about it too. There's sort of straight analogs like the crate dragon, which is sort of this big snake or lizard like thing, or the dewbacks. Those are just giant lizards, but some of those ones where there's like reptile, mixes is something.
Yeah, like Boga the Varactyl in Revenge of the Sith that Obi-Wan rides. It's kind of like a big lizard, but it's very feathery headed.
Right. I loved that part actually that's Revenge of the Sith. Yeah, I really liked that. And the little coo noises it makes.
Yeah, most of the time, you're not going to get lizards or reptiles making too many noises. Typically, if they're making a noise, it's because they're in some kind of pain in real life.
Oh, okay. Well, we don't want that to be true.
Hopefully that's not the case in Star Wars land.
Yeah, it's like, wow, that puts Boga in a whole different light. It's like, I hate this, I hate this, I hate this, get off of me.
Yeah, hopefully that's not what was happening. Hopefully maybe it was like a force sensitivity thing where he it only talks to force sensitive things or something like that.
Or just like screaming.
I mean, don't we all? Yeah, that sort of brings up the idea of what James put down as utility herps, which I really enjoy the combination of words there. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things in Star Wars, these sort of beasts of burden that, unlike here on Earth, where we're limited to large mammals, the dewback patrol from the Stormtroopers was always one of my favorites. So that's something that I sort of like to see. And I guess we don't have any big reptiles or amphibians on Earth. The Komodo dragon, maybe, but I don't think a lot of people ride those.
Yeah, you can ride it for a second and then ride it on your way up to heaven. That's all you're going to get. But it kind of like makes sense with some of these, mono ecosystem worlds where animals have to evolve to meet what the ecosystem is giving, because we couldn't put like horses on a desert world for the most part, maybe camels, but I don't know what the comparison to water need would be for a camel versus like a lizard at that size, because for the most part lizards and most reptiles honestly get their water from the food that they're eating. Like they can go and drink water, specifically like, snakes and like turtles and stuff like that. Lizards, you don't normally see them actually like drinking water. They typically get it from whatever their food source is.
Oh, interesting. So like when they eat bugs, has a high enough water content or something?
Yep.
Yeah, which I guess makes you think that like with the dewbacks, it's like these are, mounts, beasts of burden that you have to feed meat to, presumably. Are there, I want to say vegetarian, but herbivorous, yes.
There are some lizards like iguanas mostly that will eat plants and like flowers and things like that, like some anoles. But most of them are insectivores or carnivores, like our Komodo dragons and other larger monitor lizards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and Komodo dragons even have like a bit of, I'm going to get this right, venom in their bite or something like that too, I think.
Yeah.
So that would be something to think about for the dewbacks. Like maybe they just, I don't know, snack on a stormtrooper every once in a while.
Right.
I bet if, you're really mean to it, it's going to go for you as soon as your back is turned or you look weak.
Yeah.
Right, because it's like, how do you domesticate those things? That's the question. And I think that kind of gets into a little bit lizard intelligence and stuff, because like, how does it know? How does it know that, friend, not food, and that type of thing? Like it has to have some kind of level of, being able to learn and be taught, this is what you do, this isn't what you do.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because I'm trying to think. I mean, I grew up, my brother was allergic to everything cute and fluffy, so we had snakes as pets growing up. And yeah, there certainly was no training them, but I know that some people have like a real sort of more pet relationship with monitor lizards. So is there some level of domestication in reptiles?
Not that I know of. I can't say no for sure because I'm not sure how that actually works. And really, I want to give it a hard no because of whatever the rules of domestication are. Like that animal might realize that you're giving it its food, but it's not necessarily domesticated. Like, a cow or a sheep or a dog would be. It's just like, okay, I tolerate you in my space because you serve a purpose.
Right.
And that's not the same thing.
Now I'm imagining like domestication means, teaching them manners and stuff. And that's why Bosk the Trandoshan, he's not domesticated because he doesn't wear shoes on board the Star Destroyer.
Yeah.
Oh, this is one of the bounty hunters, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the idea that he's there tapping his foot because no one ever taught him manners, as opposed to just, it looks cool. His foot looks cool. I want to see it. So in terms of intelligence, are there studies about intelligence in lizards and other reptiles and amphibians here on Earth?
There absolutely are some studies, and I was kind of like looking at it beforehand, looking into like Google Scholar. And for people who don't know, Google Scholar is essentially just like a search database for a scientific publication. So when people do studies, they write a paper, And then when the paper gets published, it gets put onto Google Scholar so you can search for it. And so like there definitely are studies of people like they gave this turtle or tortoise, I believe it was, they put it in a maze and it had to like solve the maze in order to get to a strawberry. So that was the treat for the reward for getting to the end of the maze. It would do it. There have been a couple of different studies, and just from my own personal, anecdote, when I'm out catching lizards, and so I lasso lizards, and essentially what this is I have this tool that is a fishing pole. It's a telescopic fishing pole, meaning I can collapse it and expand it as necessary. And I tie a line to the end of it, and then at the end of the line, I put a slip knot, and so then I have to get the slip knot over the lizard's head, and so essentially it's kind of like fishing and lassoing lizards at the same time. And so sometimes a lizard will just sit there. It'll just sit there for as long as you need to get the loop over its head. But after that initial lassoing, if that lizard ever sees you again, it's running. As soon as it hears you, it smells you. Lizards actually have like really great hearing, and because like they feel the vibration. So like way before you even get to them, they kind of like know that you're there. As soon as it senses you, it runs away. It will never sit that well for you ever again because it doesn't want to be caught again.
And do you think the lizard knows it's you?
Now, I don't know if it knows necessarily it's me versus maybe there's some kind of connection of a humanoid figure, or maybe they see the actual lasso, because typically I'll have the lasso in hand. And so maybe they're just like, oh, this lasso, and then they're off. So there's something about, a person in the tool that they recognize, and they're like, I don't want to mess with that ever again.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that makes the Find That Lizard game more of a game for you because there's no repeats. They all run away.
Well, for field research, yes. Sometimes I just go out for fun. Like I go out on a hike on my own and I'm looking for lizards. And that gets into like the ethics of handling animals. I don't really catch animals now as an adult. I know better because it causes them stress. So I don't catch wild animals, including lizards, unless I have like a good reason to.
That was what I was going to ask, was what you're doing when you do lasso the lizard that they would remember, just because you release them, right? I assume maybe you take a blood sample or something like that, but that's all permitted work and stuff like that, I assume.
Yeah, it is a traumatic experience for the lizard, for science. So when I catch them, I was looking at lizard diets and how they might be impacted by climate change. So with the idea that lizards would be losing an important food source, which are aquatic insects, so insects that live their larval stage in water. And so in the southwestern United States, we see a lot of stream drying due to drought and climate change. So if there's no water, there's no aquatic insects. There's no aquatic insects, there's maybe less food for the lizards to eat. So when I would catch the lizards, I would look at their overall body conditions. I had a ruler, so I would measure them at different points. I would look to see if it was male or female. I would look to see if it had like parasites or stuff like that. I would take its weight. And then for a way of permanent marking and to see what it was eating, because I was doing stable isotope analysis, I would take a toe clipping. So I would take some scissors and cut off a piece of toe. So like they have like their nail, and then like there's like a little bit of skin behind the nail. And so like where that little bit of skin is, that's where I would clip. And so I would use that because a lot of other diet studies either make the lizard vomit what it was eating, or they euthanize the lizard. So I was trying to figure out some less invasive ways to do it. And since toe clipping is pretty standard for permanent identification, I was like, well, if I'm already taking toes, I might as well use them in a way that would benefit the research that I'm trying to do. I was also thinking of doing fecal samples, but DNA testing is a lot of money, and I didn't have that money as a grad student, so I couldn't do that. But I would also put them in a piece of pool noodle and massage their bellies, and that would encourage them to poop. Yes, I made the lizards poop. And so, yeah, if I was a lizard, I would not want to be caught again to go through that whole thing again.
Wow. Now I'm imagining a crate dragon, and if you can just get to its tummy and rub its tummy, you could make it poop. I don't know why you would want to do that, But
Well, with
there
all
it
the
is.
crazy stuff that those things be eating, you never know what treasures you might find.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There are some lizard species, or is it all lizard species that can drop their tail as like a distraction to predators?
So there are some lizard species, not all of them, but some can drop their tails. And so essentially, if you think of their tails as a series of like Lego bricks, just think of like a long log of Legos. That's kind of how their tails are built, but instead of Legos, they're cartilage. And so like there's a cartilage piece that has like the bumpy part of the Lego and that fits into the next one, and then so on and so forth. And so at each of those Lego pieces or cartilaginous vertebrae, they can drop their tail. However, they can only regrow their tail at each spot one time. So if a lizard drops its whole entire tail at its base, it can only regrow that one time. It will never drop again because it's a solid rod of cartilage, essentially, that's regrown. There are no more vertebrae in the tail.
Okay,
I never knew that.
So if you're a smart lizard, you break off tiny bits, like as big of a bit as you need to distract the predator.
Exactly. And we don't know if they're actively thinking about where they're breaking it off, or if it's just like an instinctual, I feel a pinch here and I do away with however much I do away with.
Now, we have Trandoshans like Bosk, and they have in some of the comics and other things that Trandoshans can regrow limbs, so that like if I think there was a story where Chewbacca had ripped the limbs off of a Trandoshan bounty hunter, and then later on he's telling stories about Chewbacca, and then you look and he's got little itty bitty stubby arms. Can lizards regrow limbs?
Just their tails.
Just their tails.
Axolotls, and I know I'm saying that incorrectly, but that amphibian, they can regrow their limbs, but that's about the extent of it.
Okay, that's cool.
There's so many things I want to know about them because I axolotl questions.
I'm curious about when you, as a lizard scientist, when you go and watch Star Wars content, I don't know if you're watching the TV shows and stuff like that, do they pop up on screen for you and you're like, hey, that's a reptile, cool, whether or not it's sort of an animal or like a species of, people basically in Star Wars? Is that something you now notice and you think about?
Absolutely not.
Okay. No, fair enough.
I just take it as it is, that it's not real life and that it's something that somebody mostly made up.
Fair enough. Yeah, because we've talked to a couple of people who like work behind the scenes, and they all watch David Attenborough or nature specials to get some ideas, I guess. And so I always like those little tidbits where it's like, oh yeah, that's like almost true, or kind of, that makes sense at least in the natural history, even if we're talking about Tatooine instead of Earth. But yeah, fair enough. Also, just enjoying Star Wars is a way to go. In terms of like enormous herps, I'm curious about. So dinosaurs are kind of reptiles, kind of birds, but obviously they were much bigger back then. And there's some, is it like the one with the sail? That's like a full reptile, like not a dinosaur.
The Dimetrodon, that's not a dinosaur.
Right. I'm just curious, I guess, about big herps that used to be around back in the day. Was that just like oxygen content on Earth? Like, why don't we have enormous reptiles anymore?
Yeah, so like dinosaurs aren't really reptiles. Reptiles, descended down. But yeah, it's essentially the oxygen content and, other major extinction events, and evolution said no.
Wow. Now I'm thinking like of the Krayt dragon, and we see it like burrowing through rock, but there's got to be a lot of lizards, that can dig through sand. So what do you think it would take strength-wise to be able to go through solid rock?
Well, I think that it hopes to be that big, but also like it would have to have really, really hard scales, and just like thinking like it would have to have some kind of like momentum. Like I don't think that it could just like break through like that kind of rock from, being still. But yeah, definitely that is the definition of hard head.
Right.
To be able to go through something like that. But I don't really see why not at that size.
Is the rancor also supposed to be reptilian?
I looked it up, and yeah, it's categorized as a reptile, which I don't know. What do you think? Could it be a reptile?
Okay, which one is this?
Well, it's my favorite. So the Rancor is in Return of the Jedi, the one that's like in the pit of Jabba's palace that he uses to like eat his enemies. And then Luke kills it, which I think is quite rude.
Yes, I remember now.
Yeah, so very big, bipedal, sort of stands up like that. And it has these big claws, which I guess I can see being sort of reptilian, but it has like a little tail. I'm just not sure.
Yeah, it doesn't have much of a tail. It's got like a little stubby tail, like maybe its tail fell off or something.
Yeah, potentially. It looks like, maybe, but it doesn't really look like it has scales, which is characteristic of reptiles. Or maybe it could, I don't know, it could be some kind of lizard reptile hybrid thing. Somebody was, doing some kind of experiment and made these things. Or maybe it just has really, really tiny scales so that it looks really smooth and not scaly. And it is just a giant bipedal lizard.
Interesting.
Like the way sharks and stuff, you don't really see the scales when further away, but when you rub their skin, you can find the scales and you're like, ouch. But yeah, that could be. So
don't rub
tiny
sharks.
Scales. Also, don't rub Rancors.
Yeah, but I want to so bad though. I always liked that the Rancor had like a, owner basically. It was almost a pet or whatever. So I want to pet a Rancor, but
back into that domestication.
Right, exactly. No, exactly.
Well,
and that sort of intelligence, yeah.
Yeah, the Dathomirian witches, they ride Rancors, and in other places they use Rancors as rides and as, war machines.
Right. So I know you're not an amphibian scientist, but I am curious if you have any thoughts about the Gungans, since you are into the prequels.
I love Jar Jar Binks. He's
okay,
one of my
perfect.
favorites. But so like the thing about them is that because they seem like most of their life history seems tied to the water, but they can be out of it. So it would seem like they would have to continuously be making some kind of like mucus to protect their skin, and to like not dry out all the way. Unless it's just one of those things where they can just breathe underwater. And in that case, I'm just like interested in how do you have both gills and lungs? Like what is it that is making it that you can breathe oxygen in air and then also in water? That type of thing.
When I was researching for this episode, I found out that Gungans are egg layers. And so they're basically regular amphibians that they have like a larval stage, and there's little Gungan tadpoles. And, then they eventually grow up into bipedal
Interesting. Because I don't watch episode 1 all that often. But when they're under the Gungan city underwater, they're breathing air again, right? Like, don't they go into like bubbles?
Yeah.
Like
Jar Jar swims through the water without any sort of air thing. So he can obviously breathe in water or respire in water, but then, their whole city is in air bubbles, which...
Maybe he's not breathing in the water. Maybe he's just holding his breath for a really long time.
True.
That's what I was going to say. Like, if they don't ever speak in water, then are they really breathing in the water? Or is it just able to swim that far? Because like frogs, now correct me if I'm wrong, frogs... like when they're tadpoles and stuff like that, breathe water, but then when they're frogs, they breathe air, but they can swim underwater, right?
Yes.
So maybe it's sort of like that. So.
Potentially. Or it could just be one of those things where it's just like, okay, we just need to be able to have like a reason for the humans to be able to, how they gonna talk underwater and stuff like that. We gotta go to them.
Yeah.
Being able to hold their breath for a long time kind of like makes the most sense. But if it's an amphibian, if it has a larval stage, then it's more amphibian than reptile, then, maybe they can do both. Yeah. And for whatever reason, maybe at the adult stage, being in the air is more preferable or something like that.
And they just don't show us, Jar Jar back in like a tank of goo or something like that on the ship every night, like when he's on Tatooine. Because I would expect that, a water-dwelling species wouldn't hold up very well.
Yeah, he does say that the sun is doing murder to his skin, so they do address that issue.
I feel like being an amphibian sort of explains a little bit more about why some of the Gungans look different, right? Like, doesn't the leader of the Gungans have sort of a different... like his eyes are set differently and stuff like that. So maybe it explains some of that. Like that's just an even older life stage or alternate life stage.
That's cool that you could metamorphose. I was thinking it was just dimorphic, that some look more tall humanoid and some look more the squat
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I feel like I'm gonna have to go back and watch those sequences again.
In Empire Strikes Back in Dagobah, they basically brought real world snakes and lizards onto the set and, kind of draped them on stuff. And I don't know, do you get a chance to like look at those and see if you could identify what they were? Or...
Yeah, so first things first, you had a couple links in here for California Herps, and I love that website. So just a quick plug for them. If you're in California and you're trying to identify a reptile or an amphibian, California Herps essentially is this huge database that gives you all kinds of descriptions for all the reptiles and amphibians that you're going to find in the state, and they're fantastic. One of them, the nudge, that definitely looked like a green iguana to me. The sleen looked like a monitor lizard to me, and that was confirmed by California Herps. And then the snake was a python.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the parts of Dagobah where Luke is training or running around or whatever, and there's just what's clearly a bunch of California reptiles and amphibians or reptiles sort of brought
and I think inside Yoda's hut, Luke moves a little striped snake, and I think that's a king snake.
Yeah, so one of those is venomous and one of those isn't, right? There's a red
the
touches
king snake
black
versus the
thing.
coral snake, which is not that rhyme gets you right most of the time, but it's not always true. So I do have to say, if you don't know what it is, don't pick it up.
Fair enough.
Always good advice.
Yes, always good
for pretty much any type of science. If you don't know what it is, don't pick it up.
Right, exactly. Like as a chemist, I'm a don't lick it sort of person. Whereas when we interviewed the geologist, it's like, of course, lick that rock, So I think with herps, maybe this is how we should classify all sciences, the lick and don't lick variety.
Yeah.
So for herps, definitely don't lick.
Do not lick.
What about those people who lick toads?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, don't do that.
Don't do that.
And it's honestly it's really bad for the toads. There's a lot of work being done right now, and I know with the Tucson Herpetological Society with the Sonoran desert toad, they're doing a lot of outreach and activism because it's impacting the Sonoran desert toad population and stuff out there, because people are going out there they poach the toads and they lick it, and they cause injury and stuff to the toes because they're trying to get high. Yeah, it's actually a really big problem. Do not leave the toes alone.
When an agency's social media account is I can't believe we have to say this, everyone, don't lick the toads.
Wow, now I'm imagining Grogu licking Frog Lady and just getting totally hallucinogenic.
Yeah, and it's dangerous. You can really have a really bad trip, and your mind is not going to be the same afterwards. So it's
There was that thing on Book of Boba Fett. What did they do with that little lizard?
Went up his nose. That's right. Did you watch Book of Boba Fett?
I haven't yet.
Okay, yeah. There's a sort of Vision Quest type sequence where they're there's this little lizard, it looks like an anole or something like that, and he's oh, cute little lizard, and it climbs up his nose, and then he goes off on this quest basically, and it's what? So don't sniff the lizards is what you do.
There is no lizard that will do that for you. That is fiction.
Don't sniff the lizards.
No licking, no sniffing.
Don't touch. Just look at it.
Don't touch. Just look at it.
Look.
Right.
It's when your parents take you into the store, hands in your pockets. Don't touch nothing. Okay.
I like it. Or take a picture and send it to Dr. Earyn McGee for Find That Lizard.
Exactly.
Nothing else. I'm curious what your favorite Star Wars character is.
Ooh, that's a hard question that I should have anticipated but didn't.
We should start warning people that we're
No. I think it's better that we don't.
Okay.
My favorite character. I don't know. I don't know if I have a favorite character, to be honest.
It sounds like the prequels are sort of your trilogy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. That's such a hard question.
So if someone was interested in getting into herpetology, what would be the path you would suggest?
I would suggest looking for your local herpetological society. So these are essentially clubs for professional and amateur herpetologists, so herpers. They typically will run maybe different programs or different speaker series and stuff like that. There's the Partners in Amphibian and Reptile Conservation. So you can look to see if they have like a local chapter and you can get involved with them. You can look to see if there's any like herpetologists at like the local university or college, community college campuses, and see if they're looking for any like lab techs or, field techs and stuff like that. Even if you're like in like elementary school or whatever, sometimes people will be like, yeah, we're doing like this outreach event, and be able to like let kids into their labs and stuff like that. Really, I would just say to go outside and explore. And then, you'll find like these other resources. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I just kind of like fell into herpetology and lizards and stuff. I just got lucky where somebody connected me to the right person. So don't stress about it. Just have fun and just look to see what resources are available to you locally.
Earyn, tell us a little bit more about where we can find you on social media, maybe your if-then work and those sorts of things.
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Afro, AFRO _ Herper, HERPER. Yeah, that's pretty much my socials. I have a website, ErynMcGee.com. I have a contact form there. And so if you have like any, like I do speaking engagements and other podcasts and stuff like that. So I'm always happy to chat about that. And I do like a lot of outreach events. So yeah, I'm out here.
Well, we'll put all those links in the show notes. But also I want to point out that it's Earyn spelled EARYN. And also you were on our Jurassic World panel for Comic-Con last year, right?
Yes, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for being here. I feel like I learned a lot about reptiles and amphibians, and maybe also not to take Star Wars quite so seriously when it comes to representing them, and that's okay.
I have fun with it, so yeah. Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Earyn. That wraps up this episode of Star Warsologies. We want to thank our guest, Dr. Earyn McGee, and we want to thank all of you for listening. Are you looking for the links we might have talked about? Check out our show notes page available at skywalkingthroughneverland.com/star-warsologies/. Also, check out the Star Warsologies YouTube channel where we post the episodes with related visuals from Star Wars.
If you have an idea for a topic for Star Warsologies, or you know an expert that we should interview, let us know at Star Warsologies on Twitter and Instagram, or Star Warsologies, OLOGIES @gmail.com. We also have a fan group on Facebook. We cleverly named it the Star Warsologies Podcast Fan Group, so join today and chat with us and your fellow listeners. And please also rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite service, and share it with your friends.
No topic is off limits. Even figuring out how the binary language of evaporators is different from the binary language of load lifters.
We are part of the Skywalking Network, where you can also find a variety of other great shows about Star Wars, Disney, and Marvel. That includes Talking Apes, the Max FX podcast, Neverland Clubhouse, and the flagship show Skywalking Through Neverland. There's also a YouTube show called Today in Star Wars History. You can find all of these at skywalkingnetwork.com.
See you next time on Star Warsologies when we discuss dance in Star Wars.
We're also going to be at Star Wars Celebration in London, April 7th through 10th. We'll have more details about the dates of the panels coming soon. But for now, we know that we'll be hosting 3 panels. One is called Making Star Wars Magic, Behind the Scenes Stories, where we'll chat with some creatives from the various Star Wars movies and TV shows.
We also have The Science of Return of the Jedi, celebrating the 40th anniversary of Return of the Jedi. And we have Andor, the Empire and a History of Resistance, looking more at the social science of basically resisting tyranny. So look for those at Star Wars Celebration in London.
Yeah, and come introduce yourselves and let us know that you're a fan of the show. It'll be great to see you.